the journey to Betty was actually very methodical and mechanical, and I'll kind of walk you through it. The first question we ever asked ourselves was, what would happen if we didn't give the customer to DraftKings or FanDuel? What would happen if we kept the player ourselves? So that was always a burning question that we had in our head. The other question we asked was, what can we do that could get really big? And then when you dissect the landscape within gaming, there's really only two ways to get there. You are either an operator or kind of on the platform side, but that's really hard. There's less of those big outcomes. When you look at like the distribution of like really big outcomes, they're really on the, when I say big, I mean $1 billion plus. They happen on the operator side.
This podcast is sponsored by Pragmatic Solutions, the player account management platform chosen by today's smart betting and gaming operators. Don't let technical constraints delay you from achieving your business goals. Expand your business, boost your margins, and dominate the market in any leading regulated jurisdiction with our powerful, flexible, and secure iGaming platform. Enjoy its extensive marketing tools, compliance protection, real-time data, and a wide portfolio of over 1,000 industry providers. It's time to upgrade your technology. Let Pragmatic Solutions show you the modern approach. Visit pragmatic.solutions and join the smart thinkers.
This podcast is brought to you by Pragmatic Play, a leading game developer providing player favorites to the most successful brands across the industry. With an award-winning multi-product portfolio of slots, live casino, bingo, virtual sports, and more, Pragmatic Play is powering up new possibilities of play through one single API. Visit pragmaticplay.com and discover your favorite every time.
Bingo, bango, bongo. We are live here today with Justin Park, co-founder and CEO of Betty. How are you doing today, Justin?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Pierre. I'm excited to be here.
Dude, I'm super excited, of course. We have, in the time of this recording, we obviously have Next NYC next week where we meet each other in person to discuss more. But I am super excited to do this episode today because, Justin, you are obviously a massive trailblazer in the industry today, and you haven't chosen the easy route when it comes to starting an operator in North America today, while others are trying to kind of enter the industry from alternative routes, shall we say. Justin and Betty is taking the old school regulated approach with the challenger brand of Betty.ca that we're going to dive deeper into today. But Justin, as a starting point, you are obviously a serial entrepreneur with quite interesting history that led you to this point. So I wanted to ask you first question. Justin, you were born, you are here now. What happened in between?
Yeah, wow. What a great question. Well, I think the first thing I would add is I'm originally from Champaign-Urbana, Illinois, which is in the middle of the state, and something I think I had some shame around, actually. I've since kind of celebrated. I celebrate that now, but from the Midwest, right? And I've been in New York now for 15 years. Serial founder. I'm working. Betty's now my third business.
Right.
And I started two others before, but that's professionally what's happened. And then personally, I'm married. I have two children, a 3.5-year-old daughter, a 6-month-old boy. We have a small dog named Dolly, who's this Pomeranian. Yeah, and I think also in the meantime, just developed more and more gratitude for things.
Absolutely amazing. And Justin, talk about the previous ventures that you built, the two previous ones that preceded Betty, and kind of what led you to then, start the third venture, this big push now in Betty.
Yeah. So I just as a founder, I started my first business 1 year out of college. I did 1 year of consulting, and then had a lot of hubris to say I can go build something. So I was like maybe 22 at the time. The first business I started was a enterprise marketing technology business. And so what we did was help enterprise brands like Microsoft and Citibank scale the creation of original video through a network of freelancers. We had 2,000 freelancers across the country and the software layer. We ended up selling it. It wasn't a great outcome. And the headline there was, very inexperienced founder, pretty bad market selection, right? My second business was called the QL Gaming Group, which eventually became an affiliate. We were one of the early affiliates in the US, starting with New Jersey in 2018. We built these like tipping services, which I guess services in Europe, you call them tipping services, but data and analytics for sports bettors, fantasy players. Initially was a subscription business. Then we pivoted to the affiliate model, sold it for a little over $30 million in 2021. So definitely a positive outcome, not huge, but positive. And on that one, I would say, more of an experienced founder, but the market we chose initially wasn't actually that good again, which leads us to Betty, which I believe is a combination of, okay, I know what I'm doing. We picked a great market and it's coming together.
Brilliant. And so let's talk about the birth of Betty. Can you talk about what was the founding idea of starting Betty? Because you're still launching into a niche market in a regulated space during a very difficult period, right? I mean, talk about how you decided that you want to start this company. Yeah,
sure. So my co-founder, Jordan, and I, he's a couple doors down. We've been working together since 2018. He was the chief operating officer of my last business. The journey to Betty was actually very methodical and mechanical, and I'll kind of walk you through it. The first question we ever asked ourselves was, what would happen if we didn't give the customer to DraftKings or FanDuel? What would happen if we kept the player ourselves? So that was always a burning question that we had in our head. The other question we asked was, what can we do that could get really big? And then when you dissect the landscape within gaming, there's really only two ways to get there. You are either an operator or kind of on the platform side, but that's really hard. There's less of those big outcomes. When you look at like the distribution of like really big outcomes, are really when I say big, I mean $1 billion plus. They happen on the operator side. And then after that, we actually started talking to players in North America, and we interviewed over 100 players, like on the phone, on Zoom. We actually had players like pull up their DraftKings casino, pull up their FanDuel casino, like actually play the products live. So we have like dozens of recordings. And so all of that was like the source material and source inspiration for what eventually became Betty.
Brilliant. And I think my first question here, especially as someone who is operating in the industry primarily from a European perspective, is in the last couple of years, there's been a trend where it's very difficult for startup operators to operate within the regulated environment, and oftentimes operators will start in pre-regulated markets or from the sidelines, let's say. And this is obviously becoming a trend in the US as well, with sweepstakes and DFS and so on and so forth. Why did you choose to go down the regulated approach when you could have created a crypto casino, for example, or go down different routes to find those user acquisition channels?
I wish I had a better answer than this, but I'm new to the category. So 3 years ago, I didn't know anything about, well, actually more 3.5 years ago, I didn't know anything about casino. I didn't even really understand what the unregulated market was, actually, to be candid. I didn't even realize that was an opportunity. Had I known, it may have changed some of our decision making, but it was just ignorance, really.
Interesting to hear, because nonetheless, you still find where the multiples are in terms of fundraising and so on and so forth is more interesting on the regulated side, right? And you are obviously a VC-funded company. So I wanted to talk about that point as well. So when you decided to launch Betty and you go out to the market to seek funding, this is at a time where the industry is kind of consolidating towards the bigger players, right? How were those initial conversations with the potential investors that you were talking to launching and operating in North America?
Yeah. So, I mean, because I wasn't even aware of the unregulated opportunity, I pretty much just started with regulated as the only option. And to your point, you can create enterprise value, you can generate a return for shareholders, so you can form capital around this initiative. The general thought, which I still believe is held, is the North American market is effectively an oligopoly with the big three, three and a half that have just captured the market, and there is just no way to penetrate. So that was just the mindset, again, which I still think is pervasive. And I think one of the interesting things about Betty's were like challenging that view. And so in many ways, I think we're a beacon of hope, and we can talk about that a little bit. But to answer your question directly, that was kind of the biggest hurdle. How are you going to compete with the incumbents? Not only incumbents, but incumbents that are like very well capitalized. Because in Europe, you can still create a niche in certain markets where you don't have these massive conglomerates. So that was definitely the biggest challenge.
Yeah, brilliant. And once you went into those conversations, did you have a lot of resistance from investors that took for granted that this is just never going to fly, or did you?
Yeah, I mean, so the first 2 million we raised, I led that round personally. So I put $1 million in, and I just invited all of my investors from my last business into this one. Okay, right. And because I had made them money, I think candidly they felt obligated to back me again. So there's some obligation, some
good leverage.
Okay, he's doing it, so like we'll do it, right?
Yeah.
I don't think we had really we had an investment memorandum that was actually quite coherent, that was backed up by all these user interviews. And then we actually did a couple hundred kind of informational interviews with like platform, people who built platforms, like all aspects of the business. So it was really well thought out, tons and tons of research, and a lot of that was captured in this pre-seed investment memorandum where a lot of the logic still holds today. But most of that initial money was reputation driven and relationship driven, rather than relationship driven, reputation driven, and this makes sense. I'm not going to put a lot of money into it, but we'll see how it goes. Like that's basically how it started.
Yeah, and isn't that also kind of the story in most fundraising cases, that investors are looking to invest more in the founder oftentimes than, let's say, the pitch deck? Is that your experience as well in general?
Definitely. I think like when people are making that initial decision, especially if you're not an institutional investor, I mean, there is certainly the strategy and the theory, but there's also like an emotional component of like, I want to be involved in this person's journey for whatever reason. I have a connection with this person. I want to see them succeed, and I want to have my handprint or fingerprint on it. What's interesting though is we're now closing some secondary sales of stock right now, and some of the early investors are actually selling. And I think one of the reasons why they're doing that is because A, it's a very good return in such a short period of time, but B, I'm not sure they actually underwrote the investment in a very methodical way. So as we've progressed, I don't think they could really re-underwrite it, because they never really underwrote it to begin with. So it's almost like, I don't know actually if this is good value or not, or where this business is going. It's a good return, so I'm going to take it. So that's the flip side of having, I guess that is the role. Now that we're talking about it, I think that is the role of your early investors. It's much more of an emotional decision. And I think in the long run, that emotional part can there's a bias that comes later on when you reevaluate the company.
Yeah, makes sense for sure. So Justin, obviously you managed to attract the capital. You launched Betty, and 3.5 years later, of course, we know that it became a success. But can you talk about the early days of building and launching Betty? And have you pivoted anything since the early days, or did you find early success straight away, or did you have challenges along the way?
So the first, I would say, the first three chapters, which were each coincided with a funding round, were, chapter one was, we're going to build our in-house platform. We're going to get a license in Ontario, and we're going to get that platform certified. Like, that was the scope of work. And that's what I told investors. Like, if we get this done with $2 million, we're going to feel really good. The second chapter was, okay, we need $5 million to now launch this product and put enough behind marketing and the operations to prove that this mousetrap is actually viable. The third chapter, which coincided with another $5 million raise, was then saying, okay, this mousetrap is working, let's start scaling it up. And so those three chapters occurred over, I would say, a 2-year period, roughly, where we ended year two live on I forget the exact numbers, maybe like a $10 million run rate or so. And we had very favorable economics. Like, the user retention was very favorable. Things just look good. So then rolling into last year, it was about chapter 4, which is really scaling and growing the business. And that has been much more around people than anything else.
Brilliant. And can you talk a little bit more about the actual business plan of Betty? What is it that you do differently, let's say, and what is the business case of Betty as a brand? You choose, for example, to go down on the online casino route rather than sports betting. You have a very particular brand and so on. Talk a little bit more about what differentiates you from the DraftKings and FanDuels of the world.
So you mentioned the European market a moment ago, and I also talked about some of the foundational research that we did. And I'm a big fan of professional research, and by that I mean like going back in time and just talking to as many people as possible and just studying, like really studying the game, studying the market. So I came across two companies that you've already known about for years. One is GameSys. The other one was Tombola. GameSys in particular was, I would say, the source material for Betty. I was like, wow, there is more or less a casino-only business that's doing like $2 billion in revenue a year. Holy smokes. Like, this is going to be done again in North America. So that was a big part of it, that's where the casino only came from, okay, using GameSys as a source material. Then from there, we looked at actually the casino mix. Through those 100 or so interviews, it became very, very clear that there's actually two different personas within casino. There's slot players, and then there's your table game, blackjack, roulette, sports bettor type of players. Different personas. Then we're like, whoa, slots is 70 to 80% of the market. Let's just anchor around that persona. Whoa, half of that TAM is driven by women. Interesting, right? Then we were interviewing, again, dozens of women. We're like, this is also a different person. And that's kind of the scaffolding that we use to kind of then move forward.
Yeah. And why do you think it is, Justin, that on the sports betting side of things, you talk about this oligopoly or almost a duopoly on the sports betting side between FanDuel and DraftKings that secured 80% of the market. Challenger brands are having a really hard time to penetrate online sports betting. However, on the online casino side of things, it seems to be more space to challenge, let's say, the incumbent brands. Why are those two verticals differently, do you think?
So if we go back to first principles around what's the difference between sports betting and casino, I would say sports betting is more like putting on a play, because every day it's different. There's a new event. Casino is like a movie. You build the game, you publish it, it's static. So right from the get-go, there's a fundamental difference where DraftKings and FanDuel, from a sports betting standpoint, those are more like execution engines. You don't hang out there. After you place your bet, the core experience is the game itself. With casino, the experience is the casino. And because of that, I think there's more fragmentation in the casino world in general, and you see this in Europe relative to sports. Because in sports, it's just give me selection, give me price, fine. There's not much, I don't want to oversimplify it, but like if you optimize against those two pillars, like I think you can suck more oxygen out of the market. Whereas in casino, again, the experience is the casino. You're hanging out in there. So you can, as an operator, you can choose to have different points of view, right? Like we're slot only. Someone could come out and say, hey, we're blackjack only. You can start carving more of a niche. Whereas again, in sports, if you said, hey, we're going to just do NFL, I don't know about that.
Right. And another point as well, I believe, is like the sports betting vertical is dominated by the male demographic, right? So you see DraftKings and FanDuel and the other brands that are active as a sports betting first brands, let's say, are very like male centric, let's say, in their promotion and marketing. Whereas it seems like you have taken advantage of that fact, right? When you angle betting towards the female demographic, which maybe are lacking that brand that are catering to them.
That's a good point too. Yeah, sports it's definitely, I think, more of a homogeneous audience, and casino is more diverse. So again, that creates more opportunity for niche players.
Yes. And talk as well about, so it seems to me also like the sports betting vertical is very product driven. Let's say in order to become a leading sports betting operator, you need to invest a lot of money and effort in technology. But the casino operator seems to be a much more commoditized product in the sense that, as you point out, the experience happens in the casino. However, all casinos are offering the same games, for example, so there isn't really that much different in that experience itself. So like, how do you then differentiate yourself from other casino brands that are, at the end of the day, offering exactly the same games from the same providers?
So when I was underwriting the initial investment myself, that was the question. Why would someone play Cleopatra on Betty, where they can play the game literally on 50 other operators in Ontario? And the answer that I came up with was bringing in the metagame mechanics from social casino, so the game around the game, into our offering. This is a very important point around what Betty has done. So for us, when you're playing, there is a reason to play outside of just spinning the slot. And that's a very important point.
Yeah. And were there any like light bulbs along the way where you realized that, okay, this is a great way to differentiate on a product perspective, or how did you then come up with the ideas to?
Yeah, so this idea, I mean, a lot of people have asked the question, both on the real money side and the social side. And I talked to a lot of people as to why no one's done it. And I think the light bulb moment was, there isn't a good reason why it hasn't been done, actually. So let's just go do it, Yeah. It was kind of that simple.
Yeah, brilliant. And I mean, if you experience Betty today, what would you say are the biggest points of differentiation between yourself and DraftKings, for example?
So first, it's slot only, okay? So that's literally the only thing you can do on the website. And right from there, the entire UX is just around that one singular experience. I would say that's very different. And in addition to that, our metagame, or what other people would call gamification, is like also very prevalent. So when you're playing, as you're spinning, you can level up and you earn this Betty coin, which you can then use to buy stuff in the shop. It's a very fun and very engaging yet simple and powerful loop. We actually submitted a patent for it in the US, which I believe we're going to get pieces of it.
Brilliant. And Another question, I suppose, is you chose to enter a single market in Ontario, as you mentioned earlier. That is still the single market that you operate in. I know that you have bigger plans than Ontario alone, but why did you choose to enter just one single market when, of course, there are many other states that you could have entered at the same time?
So the decision to enter Ontario was really around licensing costs. It's like 10 times cheaper relative to New Jersey. So it was just a byproduct of scarcity. And then we stayed there for three reasons. One, a byproduct of scarcity. It's not like we could go anywhere anyways because we don't have money to. Two, we were finding some success. But three, and I will give a shout out to one of our early angel investors and advisors, the founder of Mr. Q, Savas. He was very informative and influential to us early on. And he was like, dude, don't leave Ontario. Don't even think about it. And I was like, you're right. So I will give him a shout out.
And Mr. Q, of course, is another hero brand, very similar to Betty, and they have had really good success in only focusing on the UK market, right? As a casino-only brand. It's a very, very similar business, actually, from a different market approach.
I mean, it goes back to that professional research. Like, if you really spend the time to study the market and study what's going on, you end up finding things like that, you know, and you're like, holy smokes, like someone's sort of done this. And like, you try to put your ego aside and say, you know what, Savas, like right now knows a lot more than us. So why don't we just shut up and listen? And that's what basically we did that, more or less.
Brilliant, Justin. So you, of course, found really great success in Ontario. And one of the interesting things that you do, we're going to talk about that a little bit later, is that you actually publish your net revenues publicly, even though you are a private company. But on that note, a year kind of and a bit later from launch, you're obviously growing exponentially in terms of net revenue and active players. What would you attribute that success to? Because you talked about the product itself, you talked about user acquisition, the brand is positioned a little bit differently. If you were to single out one of those, or perhaps something else, what is the main, let's say, or the most important point to your success so far?
Yeah, this is one of those answers that like I never like to hear, but it's true. I think number one on the baseline, it's just the value system for us of just being maniacal about the customer, and how that expresses itself. Just a couple examples. One, we have instant withdrawals. Two, we don't have playthrough requirements on our bonuses. Those are just examples of that kind of customer first approach. And then on top of that, I would say is team. And I would say the team we've built is amazing. And I would argue possibly the best team assembled in North America since the DraftKings founders. Wow. So when you have those two things, awesome stuff happens.
Yeah. It's hard to go wrong, essentially. Like when you get the right people on the bus, even if, let's say, the bus is not steering in the right direction, you'll be able to pivot to the point where you eventually will become successful if you have the right people with you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Brilliant. So Justin, back to this point of publishing numbers publicly on LinkedIn. So every quarter we get a really exciting update from Justin. That is one of the few posts that you make on that platform. I took notice of, by the way. And it's always interesting to follow those updates, of course. You are a private company. So why would you disclose your numbers publicly and kind of make this success to put the success out there, potentially risking that other competitors will take note and try to copy you or do the same thing or learn from you and so on? Why do you choose to publish your numbers?
So purely from like a calculating perspective, what we're betting on is the attention we receive and our ability to then recruit more talent, attract more capital, that will outweigh the inevitable, which is people then reverse engineering what we're doing and copying. So like it's kind of a gamble, no pun intended, on those two effects. Starting out, I kind of just asked the question, like, why can't private companies share this information? Like, who said that you're not supposed to do that? And again, I kind of reached the conclusion, if they're good, I don't see why you wouldn't.
So talk more on that front, by the way, of the results so far. So I'm just looking at the bar graph in front of me here. Of course, you're generating 9.5 million net revenue currently in the month of December. But talk about the year of 2024, the growth that you saw. What were the actual numbers that you have produced so far?
Yeah, well, I want to make one minor point, then I'll get into the broader question. So like when we publish our numbers, we actually are very explicit about not only its net revenue, but we show you how it's calculated.
Yeah, important.
And that's important because it speaks to just, again, our values and how we play the game. Like this is the most academically rigorous portrayal of what this business is doing. And I think that's one of the challenges in gaming is a lot of companies will share GGR and GR, and it's just unclear, right? And that's actually the question I get from people who know about the category. They're like, what is this handle? I'm like, dude, no, this is like revenue. Okay. Like straight up, like there's no discussion about it. And I think that's an important point. Yeah. In terms of the results, we ended the year on a $115 million net revenue run rate USD. And really what drove that is retention. We're spending at the time, $2.5 to $3 million a month in marketing. So that's Q4 of last year, which isn't a ton. However, we retain over 50% of our customers after the first month, and that number stabilizes at 40% months 3, 4 onwards. So it's a very retention-driven growth, and that's the key. It's retention-driven growth.
Yeah, is there any comparisons comparable to say the DraftKings, the FanDuels that you can compare these numbers to?
I mean, anecdotally, I think operators that are even at a 30% retention at month 1 is seen as pretty good. Again, we're above 50%. So I think what you're seeing is, from what I've seen, numbers that you've never seen before, basically.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, very interesting. And looking forward now, Justin, of course, so you had great success and you kind of have a proof of concept at this point is pretty clear, right, in the market of Ontario. And I know that you have some pretty exciting growth plans to grow out of Ontario. You seem to be a fan of first principle thinking, and we go back to that concept quite a lot in this discussion. And I wanted to ask you this question now. So talk about the McDonald's of iGaming franchise approach that you have more or less invented that hasn't been done before now as you start thinking about scaling the business.
Yeah, so one of the things that happened last year, aside from growth, is we became much more ambitious and we really started to believe, and our vision evolved to now wanting to become a global casino brand, similar to like a Bet365, right? A Bet365 of casino, if you will. And then it was like, okay, well, how are you going to do that? And the idea of our existing management team being able to maintain quality in the market we're in and also enter other markets, I couldn't resolve that. I don't see how that's possible. And then on top of that, when you take into account casino is such a localized experience, local regulations, many times there's a local payment method, games, etc. You need focus. And how do you create that focus at scale? It kind of led to this franchise idea, which let me expand upon. Really what we're doing, it's not quite a franchise. It's more like we want to create independent business units for every market we're in. So if we were to enter the UK, for example, we would have a CEO with meaningful ownership of that subsidiary. We would raise capital into that subsidiary, and hopefully we would raise capital from local investors who really know the market. We would provide kind of an open source version of our tech stack along with the CTO, so they can just manage and manipulate it on their own. And they would be able to just build freely. That's the idea. Just build freely.
And then what would you contribute with centrally? Let's say the idea, as you point out, is that Betty as a brand will drive that success in those markets. The technology, for example, what will differentiate you from starting from that CEO starting his own operator?
So the idea is, like, I think we can create global scale if we have two sets of network effects. The first is if you have a bunch of companies all using the Betty brand in parallel, like effectively we'll all kind of increase the goodwill, and there'll be this 1 + 1 + 1 = 27 type of thing. That's one thought. And then the other is if we have all these sort of, call it independent nodes, technically, where the different businesses can share code and share features and functionalities, you almost create a network effect on the tech side, like almost like an internal open source world. And these two network effects, I believe, allow you to get to global scale in a very capitally efficient manner. It's still very conceptual, but I think it will work.
Yeah, it's an interesting approach. It obviously hasn't been tested and tried yet in the industry. Can you share some details of what are the markets that you are interested in pursuing after Ontario?
Sure. Yeah, we and I definitely reserve the right to take this back, but we want to be number one or number two in any market we enter. And we're leaning towards smaller niche markets that are more long tail. Switzerland is an example. New Zealand is an example. Because, I don't know how many times I've heard this, people say, oh, this insert market is surprisingly big. How many times have you heard that? This is surprisingly big. I've heard it like 27 times. So at that point, it's not even surprising anymore. There are just big markets everywhere, and they don't have to be New Jersey, right? They don't have to be Brazil.
Mm-hmm. I took note, of course, that you did not mention any US states particularly. So as a Canada-based business with that expertise in-house, you are still not interested in looking at US state as part of your expansion?
Yeah, so we do have a US plan that's already in motion. And in order for me to share about it, I would actually need to get sort of consent from other people. Right. So I will refrain from doing so right now, but there is something in motion.
Okay, as Next chief here, I try my best at least to get some information out of my interview object, so I appreciate the little one that you can share. So Justin, I want to just take a step back here. Of course, you talked about the long experience that you have now as an entrepreneur. You founded 3 businesses with many different lessons and growth along the way. Just speaking to the younger segment, let's say, of the listeners that are thinking about going on that entrepreneurial journey, what would you say are the attributes needed to pursue an entrepreneurial journey? Let's say, what do you need to prepare yourself for in order to go on that journey?
Yeah, I mean, this is my 2 cents. So I think the journey is ultimately a journey inward. So it's really a process of self-discovery and learning about yourself and learning about your strengths and your weaknesses and pushing the boundaries. And that's what it's all about. It's an inside sort of job, if you will. I would say some really important ingredients include curiosity, just wanting to naturally explore and learn stuff. And then as you go, it becomes also a lot about service and wanting to be of service, not only to your customers, but your team, your investors. Just how do I help, right? Because that's kind of the tried and true path to well-being, is just helping people.
Yeah, brilliant. And as the leader of Betty now, obviously you founded several startups that you then exited. Once the company scales, because I took note in your LinkedIn post that you are looking to build, of course, the next Bet365, however, on the casino side, and that obviously takes a massive amount of scale. For you as a serial entrepreneur that comes in with maybe a mindset of being very creative, being involved in a lot of different parts of the business and contributing here and there. Once the company scales and become more rigid, what type of different skill set do you need from operating a small business to a big business? And is that also the case that it's always the founder that should kind of lead that whole journey? Where do you see yourself in that big growth journey if the company scales into the tens of thousands of employees potentially?
Yeah, I mean, Pierre, that's kind of like a real-time thing. Like I've never managed growth. We're like a 150-person company or so. So we're not huge, but we're like a lot bigger than we were last year. This is new for me. Okay.
It's a big company.
So yeah, I mean, I'm just kind of winging it as we go, and figuring it out as we go. There are lessons that I've learned that I think are really important though. One is you have to keep upgrading your leadership. 100 million%. And then also augmenting all pieces of the business together, almost like muscles in your body, where finance and your people and culture / HR, whatever phrase you like to use, those are overlooked. So investing in those are key. And what I'm also finding is like trying to break the monolith, like avoiding this monolith and just keep breaking it into smaller pieces continually. Like even just like 6 months ago, the idea of casino content was just like one thing. Well, actually it's not, right? It's like there's relationship with suppliers, there's technical integration, there's deployment of the games, there's then QA, there's arranging them in the lobby, like it's 5 or 6 different things, each with different skill sets, so that's kind of breaking it up into smaller pieces.
Yeah, brilliant. In the last recording you and me did together with our friends Benji and Lloyd as well, we talked a little bit about some of the books that have inspired you along the way to Justin. And in that episode, you mentioned that you are a bit of a bookworm. So I wanted to continue on that path for a little bit and just ask you again if you could mention some of the books that have inspired you and made you to the entrepreneur that you are today.
So cool. I have this in my notes. I keep track of like all the books I read from 2000 and started in 2020.
Yeah. How many?
I get to about 20 plus a year, I would say, that I finish. Yeah. And then like a bunch that I don't actually finish, but finishing. So some good ones. Titan, The Life of John D. Rockefeller by Ron Chernow is really, really good.
And for what purpose? Talk about that again.
That one is just like, first of all, just learning what was going on in the world, particularly the US, sort of in that second industrial revolution, 1920s, kind of even New York, like the context of like, like what the world looked like. And then on top of that, like what what domination looks like. Like Rockefeller just dominated, like, and the mindset was as such. So it's like just even getting into the mindset of that. Some other ones include actually the philosophy of Andy Warhol by Andy Warhol is a cool one as well, because it's like almost like the stream of consciousness, and he talks about in one of the sections it's called art, and he actually talks about business being like the purest form of art. So this is like one of the most iconic creative artists who's now talking about business as really the highest form, right? That's kind of interesting, you know? It's a good one. So those are a couple that I thought were good.
Brilliant. Amazing, man. A final question for you here today, Justin. Where do you see Betty in 3 years' time if you were to look into a future looking machine into the crystal ball?
I think Betty at that point has proven that it can replicate its success in Ontario in more markets. And at that point, it's now proving it can start manufacturing, if you will, these franchises almost like clockwork.
Brilliant. Well, in 3 years' time, when we follow up on this conversation, Justin, it'll be interesting to go back to this question and see where you're at that point. I really appreciate the time that you've given us here today, Justin. I'm looking forward to see you in person next week, and all the best of luck with Betty moving forward.
Yeah, thanks so much, Pierre.